Today I want to do a follow-up to my 12.3-inch FJ Cruiser Android head unit, and it's been almost 2 years since I've owned it, and I just wanted to do a follow-up video to give you guys a sense of how it's going for me. Now, this head unit by far has been my most popular topic. When I originally put out the video in September of 2019, I got a lot of comments and a lot of questions, so clearly there's an interest in these head units. Now, right off the bat, I want to say that when I was looking for these head units, there weren't a lot of these around, and I really had a hard time finding the right one. Chances are you'll find a head unit like this in black. I opted to find a silver one, and at the time there was only one seller that offered the silver version, and that was ultimately the vendor that I ended up purchasing from. However, it's now 2021. If you do a search for 12.3 Android head unit for the FJ Cruiser, you'll find a multitude of sources out there. Now you'll find a couple vendors on Amazon selling them. You'll see versions in black and silver. To my knowledge, those are the only two colors that you can get them in. So if you're looking to have a color matched theme with your FJ's color, unfortunately you're only stuck with those two colors. So the great news now is that there are many more vendors out there selling these head units, and the other good thing is that the software is now updated to Android 10. My head unit has Android 9, but if you purchase one today, you'll probably get one with Android 10, which comes with additional features. The biggest feature being, in my opinion, the ability to have a split screen mode. Anyway, I'll provide a couple of links for any of the vendors that I've found recently that you may be able to purchase these head units from. So take a look at the description down below and feel free to peruse the options at your own pace. All right, so let's get into this video. The purpose of this video is mainly to provide an update to how the head unit is holding up, and number two, to answer a bunch of these questions that you guys have asked through the comments in the videos. So the first question I have is, how does it hold up? Well, in almost 2 years of ownership, I've had no issues mechanically. Everything seems to be working just fine. This is by far my favorite FJ Cruiser mod. I have absolutely zero regrets. It's not perfect, and there are definitely some things that I don't like about it, and we'll get into that later. If you have a subwoofer, do you need any additional harnesses? Yes, you do. So whenever you buy these, the vendor should ask you if you have the JBL subwoofer. In my case, I didn't have that, so I didn't need to purchase an additional wiring harness, which is called the CAN bus. If you have that subwoofer, they should be able to supply that additional wiring harness for you. If I live in the US, how does the maps work? These head units come from China. I purchased mine from a company in Australia, but before sending it to me, they specifically asked me which maps I would like to load. And I mentioned that I was living in the US, so they loaded those maps for me. Whether or not that's the case with any other vendor, I'm not exactly sure. So if you are interested in purchasing one of these things, ask them whether or not they can load the specific maps for your territory. Next question is it bright enough? Is it too dim? Is it customizable? So the screen brightness is adjustable. You'll see that there's this little X, which means to turn off the screen or to dim it. If I hold the X, the screen goes black. And if I tap on it again, it goes back. And I can just use the slider to adjust. Now here's the maximum brightness, and then here's the minimum brightness. So I've not found this to be an issue at all for me in terms of visibility in the daytime and at night. It's bright enough for me. You'll see that there's this little automatic function here. So you can set it to nighttime, daytime, and then automatic. I have it on auto mode, and the screen is set to be at 50% brightness when it turns dark. So that's a view at 50%. And I find that that's a very happy medium for me. But here's night display. Actually, I do have it set to 60. So, you know, if I wanted to make it lower at night, I can set it to something lower, and it goes all the way down to 20. You can see that's getting dimmer. It's on automatic right now, so you can tell that the screen has automatically brightened itself up. So sometimes when I'm driving, my kids will basically be distracted by the screen. Obviously kids and screens go hand in hand nowadays, but when we're listening to music and I have the screen on, they're constantly looking at the screen, especially at night when I'm trying to get them to fall asleep. I could hit that X and the screen would turn off. However, if I wanted to adjust the volume, let's say I wanted to turn the volume up or down, I would adjust it here, and immediately the screen will turn back on. So unfortunately, I can't keep that screen off. Just another thing for you to be aware of. As far as reflections go, I've never really had any issues. However, the other day I was driving around and noticed that my wife was wearing a bright colored shirt, and she was of course sitting in the passenger seat. Whenever there are brighter colors, you can kind of start to see the reflection. So here's my hand, I'm waving it over the passenger seat over here. But you know, generally I would say a good 70% of the time I'm driving alone by myself, the seat is black. I guess if you have a color matched seats to your FJ and it's a lighter color, then that might be an issue in terms of reflection. But I'm just sort of giving you guys an idea from where I'm sitting in the driver's seat, and I'm just gonna, you know, pan it over here to the reflection over here. And to make it more obvious, I've got a white towel and I'm gonna place it over the seat here, just to kind of mimic someone wearing a bright colored shirt. Okay, as you can see, I've got the towel over the seat. It's a bright white towel, and if you're from my position, I'm looking at the reflection. So, you know, I can still see things pretty clearly. However, just be aware that this is what it might look like. I don't believe that it's really that much of a distraction for me. It's a lot worse on camera. In real life, it really doesn't really impede too much of my ability to use this thing the way I want. Can this thing be rooted? And to be honest with you guys, I have no idea what that means. I purchased this specifically for playing music. I did some research on it, but I'm still not exactly sure what that means. All I know is that this is like a tablet. So if you can root a tablet, then chances are you can probably root this thing. Again, I'm not exactly sure what rooting is and what that's done for. I guess the short answer is if you can do it on an Android tablet, chances are you can do it on this thing. This head unit does have the ability to utilize Android Auto and CarPlay. I also talked about that in a couple of other videos as well. So if you have a chance, please feel free to check out the videos on CarPlay and Android Auto respectively. Alright you guys, the number one question by far that I've received about this head unit is, why isn't my hazard light button and the defroster button light working? Many of these people who have purchased this head unit have asked, and ultimately the resolution was that whenever you install the ribbons for these two things, you make sure to flip them either backwards or upside down. The way that the ribbons are oriented seem to be the complete opposite of what they should be. So if ever you are having any issues with your hazard lights or your rear defroster button working or not working, try to flip that ribbon backwards or upside down and then reinstall it that way. So that seemed to be the solution based on the discussion on the FJ Cruiser forums. So another question that people had about these things was, why are some of them cheaper and why are some of them more expensive? In terms of all of these head units, I believe that the hardware is all the same, but it's just the software and the amount of RAM and storage that comes with the system. So this one here, I believe 32 gig hard drive with 4 gigs of RAM. Really, I've only used 13 gigs. That's mostly because I store my media on an external flash drive, but this is my USB drive. I've got all of my music here. So really, I'm not storing anything on the internal drive because I'm using an external USB drive. So hard drive space really to me is not that big of a deal. If you want to opt for the larger 64 gig version, then you can pay the extra money, but to me, I don't think it's worth it. So if you see a version for like $300 and it says 2 gigs of RAM and a 32 gig hard drive, and then you see another unit for maybe $500 with 4 gigs of RAM and a 64 gig hard drive, that's where the difference is. All right, so that covers most of the questions. If you guys have any particular questions to follow up with, feel free to let me know. But for now, let me get into some of the things that I actually don't like about it. And the very first thing is the built-in graphics. Now, let me try to give you an idea of what that looks like. When you buy this head unit, the graphics were a little underwhelming. These are the original graphics that came with the head unit. And you can see that a lot of the function here is no longer present. Like I don't have the shortcut hotkey options that I did before. Navigation, Bluetooth, music, radio, video, and settings. And then, you know, it looks kind of plain Jane and pretty boring. These will launch your apps just the same as they did with the Agama car launcher. But I mean, you can kind of see that it just doesn't quite look as nice. The radio app unfortunately carries over these ugly graphics, and unfortunately I can't really change the way that the radio graphics look, but this should give you an idea of the way the graphics looked as they were originally loaded from the factory. So I'm going to go ahead and change that back. Alright, so now that that's back to the way that I like it, let's continue on with other things that I don't like about this head unit. One thing of note that I don't like about this is that you can't retain the factory Bluetooth microphone. Right above the mirror assembly, you'll see like those 3 compartments with the mesh openings. That's where the factory microphone is. So the installer originally placed the microphone somewhere near the A-pillar. I generally like to have things looking pretty stock. I opted to pull the microphone out of its housing. Just as an FYI, here is the original housing for the microphone. Originally it was black. It was mounted up here, but of course, me being me, I really like having things looking factory. So what I did was, the original idea was to install it into this overhead console. I painted it to match the color of the overhead console, and originally I was going to tape it right here. But of course that still doesn't look factory enough for me. So what I ended up doing was that I pulled apart the housing to reveal the microphone, which is an omnidirectional microphone, which I then routed from the head unit up through the A-pillar, through the headliner, and into its eventual spot, which is here. So this black dot that you see is the actual microphone. It's the exposed microphone that was in the housing, and that ring around that microphone is a black rubber grommet that I also painted to match the gray plastic trim. And as I'm speaking, you can kind of see one weird thing that's going on with the head unit here. It thinks that I'm moving. I'm not going 3 miles an hour. Clearly the car is not moving, but the GPS sometimes will show a reading of your speed, which now it looks like it's back to normal. So just one weird quirk. It's not that big of a deal, but at least I know that the GPS is picking up a signal. Continuing on along, the things that I could not keep from the original head unit is the original USB aux port, which used to sit right here in this section right here. Installing this head unit essentially rendered this completely useless. So what I had to do was I had to take apart this console, pop off this OEM aux and USB port, and then install a replacement one. I happen to find one that fits in the exact spot. It is a USB input as well as an aux input. So installing this thing also requires you to purchase an adapter, which is basically like a banana plug splitter, in order to retain the audio monoplug input for that. Another thing that I don't like about this is that you'll notice that the clock here, the internal clock, says 1042 and the FJ's clock says 1052. Ever since I've owned this, I've had a hard time keeping these clocks in sync. I'm constantly adjusting the time in the system to match the actual time. Okay, so I live in the Pacific time zone. I'm here in California. Originally, I had the time zone set to Los Angeles Pacific, and I found that this was wrong. Clearly it's set to Pacific Daylight Time. Now the clock has changed to 9:45. In reality, it's 10:54 here. So the time zone in the system is completely off. Yeah, I had to set it to Mountain Time. Here it says Denver Mountain Time. I'm going to set that there, and you'll see the clock change to 10:45, and it's really 10:54. I've kept it here on this setting However, some days I'll get into the car and I'll turn it on and the clock will match. And some days it won't match. For example, let me turn this off. I'm gonna wait for a while for the system to kind of completely shut off. And then I'm gonna turn the car back on and then we'll take a look at whether or not the times match. All right, let's try this again. I turn the car on, it's 10:57. Let's just see what time the system says. See, it says 10:57. So it does match. It's sort of inconsistent, but more consistent than not. However, some days I will turn on the car and then find that the times are just mismatched. So that's a little weird about it. Not exactly the end of the world, but just something that I wanted to point out. All right, keeping along the theme of things that don't quite match up, the music cover art in my music sometimes just doesn't match up. I do have a lot of downloaded MP3s on my flash drive that I listen to, so I'm just going to go ahead and cycle through some of the art, and you'll find that a lot of them are just sort of this generic art. So this one here, this song has the actual cover art. I keep going ahead. It's just this generic thing. You'll have some cover art here, which looks nice when it's actually working. Also, I have found that whenever you get tracks that don't have art like this, it will sometimes have the wrong art. Like for example, I have artwork from a Beyonce song that tends to show up on a lot of other tracks that clearly aren't Beyonce. Okay, so here's exactly what I'm talking about. I've got this Bruno Mars track, however, the artwork is Beyonce. For whatever reason, this head unit tends to favor the Beyonce artwork with random tracks that don't have artwork. So just a strange little quirk here that I wanted to point out. Again, not the end of the world, but something definitely quirky about it. As I mentioned in many of my other videos, I prefer to have my maps on my phone, which I leave here in the glove compartment. But if I were to be running Google Maps on the head unit, so if I'm trying to go to Venice Beach, like the first thing that I'll notice is that it's a little bit too horizontal. Now, I mean, it sounds a lot like I'm nitpicking here, but I mean the screen is so narrow that whenever you're driving, you don't really quite see enough of what's ahead of you. And generally, if possible, I would turn my phone vertically, and that gives me a better sense of the streets coming up ahead. Yeah, but you guys get the idea. One of the strengths of this unit, which is the screen, is also another detractor when it comes to using Google Maps in particular. I do think that with the new 10.0 Android software, with the ability to use split screen, I don't think that you'll really have that issue of the horizontalness of it, if for lack of a better word. If you're able to kind of split that map in half, you might have more of a better perspective on your map. Another thing I don't like about this is that it generally takes me a while to kind of get a GPS signal. Now, I did mention before that I initially relocated my GPS signal to my gauge pod here. Originally, when this system was installed for me, the GPS antenna was located here in this corner. I then eventually moved it into the speaker housing, as many of the people on the FJ forums have done and have had success with. However, I did find that I had spotty reception, and some days when I would drive out of the garage, I wouldn't get a signal until I was maybe 2 or 3 miles away from home. So eventually I did end up rerouting the GPS antenna here, but I don't get an immediate signal. So I've been sitting here for a while. You'll see that it has picked up a signal. However, I will find that whenever I start my car up in the morning, it will take me a little bit of time to retrieve a signal. So let me try to see if I can replicate that here. I'm going to turn this off, but this is only an issue for me when I first start the car for the day. If I'm out and about, it will have a signal whenever I start the car, but just something to note. I'm going to turn it on again, and you'll see the system restart itself. And let's see if the signal is there. So yeah, you'll see there it says no signal right there. And I'm not really sure if it's just where I live or if it's just sort of takes some time to get a signal, but I'm gonna go in here, see if I can find the GPS signal, navigation, GPS monitor. So yeah, you can see here that it's not reading anything. And as I mentioned, this only happens when I first start the car. Now, okay, so it took about a minute. Looks like it's picking up some signals here. So if I go back to the screen, it should show, it's still showing no. That's the little satellite icon there. So I mean, clearly there's a signal there. But when I go back, it's still showing no. So eventually it'll show up. Just a minor annoyance here in terms of that signal not showing up. There was a time when I was driving home from Arizona to Los Angeles, and I had this air recirculation to on, and sometimes when I was driving I would find that the circulation would be off, and I would be able to tell because I would, you know, not only be able to kind of smell the outside air, but also it felt a little bit warmer. Obviously, with Arizona being an arid state, the temperature change was noticeable, so I did find myself having to re-click the recirculation mode on a handful of times. I would say maybe 2 or 3 times throughout the drive, in intervals of maybe, I don't know, 10 to 15 minutes or so. Like I'd have a good stretch of 10 to 15 minutes of recirculated air, then out of nowhere, without changing any of the AC functions, I'd find that this light would be off. Don't know why that was the case, but it just happened to me that one day, and I've not been able to reproduce that since. I have no idea whether or not it has anything to do with my car or the head unit itself, but something to take note of. Another thing I don't like about it is I don't believe that the software is upgradable. We are now in Android 10 territory. I'm here on Android 9. This is not a real huge deal for me because this thing does exactly what I want it to do. And I'm almost afraid to really mess with what's already working. So, you know, the old saying, if it ain't broke, then don't fix it. Well, clearly there are tons of things that I don't necessarily like about it, but I love it for what it does, and I would not want to risk messing anything up. So I don't know if it has anything to do with MCU updates or system updates, but I don't believe that I'm able to update this from Android 9 to 10. You know, you guys may be able to figure it out, but to me it's not that big of a deal. Radio frequency can be set, although I'm not exactly sure why it's set to Europe, but it's, you know, I'm clearly picking up local radio stations just fine. You know, America 1, 2, Japan, Australia. So if you have any issues with reception, perhaps you can go back here and play around with these settings. So I'm getting a good signal. I'm not going to mess with that, so I'm just going to leave that there. Another thing I don't like about this is that it doesn't have a volume knob. That was one of the main things that I discussed in my initial review of this thing. If you have an FJ Cruiser that does not have these controls, volume up and down, track up and down mode, then I would not recommend this system, mostly because of safety reasons. I have grown accustomed to it and I am used to it, but initially I will admit that driving with this was very, very distracting, especially if I had to change between apps. Most people would have a volume control knob that they would press or just turn down to immediately turn the sound down, but in this case I do have the volume minus button to mute. But you know, if you were driving and let's say you were on the highway and you needed to brighten up your screen but accidentally hit the sound control, then you could potentially be in a very, very dangerous and annoying situation. Regarding the Bluetooth experience, one other thing, although I really liked having the ability to automatically connect to my Bluetooth, one thing that kind of really bothers me about it is that if I have my phone set to connect to my FJ Cruiser for both calls and audio, then any audio that comes out of my phone won't be heard unless I have that streaming app on, which is that A2DP. And generally, I don't have this app on by default. So for example, if I'm using Google Maps on my phone and I want to hear the step-by-step instructions, I won't be able to hear the built-in voice of the navigation, specifically because the audio is then set to go through the head unit. And if you don't have this app on, then you won't hear audio. So in order for me to get audio from my phone, I have to turn off the Bluetooth audio connection on my phone in order to hear audio from my phone. All right, so for the sake of example, I'm going to be streaming some music from my phone. The sound is coming from the phone right now, but if I switch my Bluetooth settings to be connected for audio as well as calls, then you'll hear that any audio is no longer coming from the phone. It should be coming through the system now, but it doesn't. The only way to get that audio to stream through your speakers is to have that A2DP app. And of course, Colors of the Wind will resume only if I'm streaming with this app. However, generally we will be listening to music on the USB stick. And again, if I have my Bluetooth audio set to go through the car, then any audio that comes out of the phone, including GPS navigation voices, will not be heard. So I have to make an effort to turn that off. And now I will have audio again coming from my phone. Okay, well that concludes my almost 2-year review of the 12.3-inch Android head unit for the FJ Cruiser. I know that a lot of people have sort of been waiting for this one for a long time, and I thank you guys for being patient with me. It does take a long time to make these videos, and I just wanted to make sure that I hit all the points that I wanted to talk about. Wanted to do this follow-up now just to kind of give you guys a continued look into my experience with this head unit, and I hope that it helps you if you're looking into the same thing as well. So yeah, I hope this was super helpful. If you have any additional insight or comments or questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer them for you. Once again, if you're interested in a head unit like this, they are a lot easier to find nowadays, although they are a little bit more expensive than they were before, but definitely worth the upgrade. I'm going to leave links in the description down below where I've found that you can purchase these things now, and you can compare and contrast all your different options and make a purchasing decision on your own. So with that said, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you on the next video.